Hello, my name is David Dungay and welcome to another UC Partner Update at UC Partner Summit 2022. Today I'm joined by the CEO of Alianza, Brian Beutler. Welcome to the show, Brian. How are you?
Thank you for having me, David. I'm doing great. Appreciate being here.
Fantastic. Well, today we're going to pick up on some of your channel trends, or more precisely, some of your service provider trends. The first question I want to get into today, what are some of those big challenges you're seeing within the service provider community and their migration or their switch to the cloud?
Yeah, while service providers moving their communications infrastructure to the cloud is not new to the market, it's still a new concept for many service providers. In many ways, service provider communication infrastructure is the last bastion of legacy software in the service provider's network that hasn't been moved to the cloud yet. Service providers have moved so many core elements. I think years ago, it started with CRM and support platforms, and then expanded into core engineering elements like storage, compute, databases, networking, and security. But now it's also service provider OSS, BSS, financial systems, invoicing, collections, taxation, content management, and so much more. But yet the core communications infrastructure in mass has still not moved to the cloud. And at Alianza, we're big believers that the communication software networks are kind of next in line to be cloud sourced. It used to be, we've been doing cloud communications platforms at Alianza for 10 years now. And it used to be, as we've kind of landed one service provider at a time over the last decade, we've been building more and more momentum. And now we have 200 service providers that are using our solution. And we've reached this point in time where it feels like the broader market is really ready for a change, for something bigger as an industry. Today, when we talk with executives at companies and prospects, the question's not really about if, but when service providers upgrade to the cloud. I think there's a growing sense of urgency to shut down these old legacy networks and modernize both their retail offerings and how they think about managing those offerings internally. So that for me is like challenge number one. Challenge number two is just project prioritization. Service providers, just like the rest of us, they're busy, multiple competing projects, and a lot of times service providers ask us, how big is this burden going to be? And I think very fortunate for the service provider that joins the Alianza Communications Cloud now. It's much, much easier than it was even just 5 years ago. We now have done dozens and dozens of transitions for service providers coming off legacy BroadSoft, Metaswitch, GenBand infrastructure. We kind of know what we're doing. We've mapped all the different settings and so forth over to the Alianza Cloud, and we have a dedicated project management team that really helps make it easy for those customers. We really made it a lighter fit for service providers generally. And then lastly, I would say, the other big challenge for service providers, and I would say not for all service providers, but for some specifically that are in highly regulated markets or highly regulated demographics, I'm thinking specifically like ILEX and RLEX, there's some additional regulatory burdens that they bear that around reporting, phone number ownership, phone number management, things like 911 reporting. That burden is getting better, and Alianza has brought more partners in to bear to really help kind of ease that regulatory burden and help make it easy. We're actually going to be talking a lot more about this, what we're calling telco transformation solution later this year. But I will say generally, we're bringing a lot of support to bear with these customers and really trying to hit on all fronts from transition to regulatory to make the transition as easy as possible for our customers.
Wow, fantastic. So a lot going on there in the space, which is great to hear. One question I did want to pick up on part of what you said in your first challenge there. In terms of the market, what's left to play for, as consumers, I think we're all sort of at that end of the spectrum. We're all in the cloud already, pretty much. But from a service provider perspective, how much of the market is still to play for? How much is there still to go? How much of the market is still in the cloud already?
David, great question. I think, those of us especially that are in the industry and we play here every day, we think the market's already there and it's already moved to the cloud. I think there is Metrigy report that just came out recently that said, hey, we're still not at 50% penetration of businesses that have moved to the cloud. So there's still a lot of headroom for growth. And I think, some of the reports we're looking at, that growth is still going to be anywhere from 12 to 16% a year for the next 3 to 4 years. So still really good, healthy underlying growth on the enterprise side. But that's only part of the equation for Alianza. I mean, if you look at, Alianza demographically serving service providers, still only 5% of service providers have cloud sourced their core network. So certainly it makes sense to us that on the front edge of cloud, at the enterprise and end user side, the adoption has been faster, and we're approaching 50%, really close. But on the service provider side, 95% are still deploying facilities-based legacy software and hardware solutions to power their end user cloud communications products. And that's what I think demonstrates kind of the really big opportunity for Alianza is there's 95% of this market that's still available, addressable, and we're kind of at the leading edge of what we think is a big transformation that's starting now when service providers really en masse start to move to the cloud. Maybe one other quick data point that I'll add to that, David, if you let me, as like kind of stream of thought here. But just as a quick example, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 million copper TDM lines still in service just here in the United States, and these are operating on, in many cases, 30 and 40-year-old end-of-life infrastructure that literally you can't find replacement parts for, or people that have the talent and knowledge base to management. All of these lines are going to be up for grabs in the next 5 years, are going to transition onto a modern cloud infrastructure. And we get pretty excited when we think about Alianza as really the provider positioned to give those lines and those customers a really modern home.
Fantastic. So, huge opportunity there then. Okay, looking ahead, for the rest of this year and beyond, if you could summarize, the key value drivers for service providers, what would you say and what are the reasons behind that?
Yeah, David, I would start off by saying that it's really no secret in the market that service providers have fallen behind over the last decade and lost share to OTT providers that have really out-innovated them and disintermediated the long-term relationship that's existed between broadband operators and their end-user customers. And if you trace back the history of this, I think this is largely because the OTT segment operates on proprietary, agile, cloud-based architectures and platforms that have just out-innovated the service providers' legacy networks that got installed in what I'll call VoIP 1.0 and even VoIP 2.0 over the last 2 decades. And if service providers are going to compete and start winning back their fair share of the market, they're going to have to think like their OTT competitors. And first, that means they have to start optimizing for growth rather than optimizing for COGS reduction. Right? I think for a long time, service providers, when they started losing share to their OTT competitors, they drove value by optimizing EBITDA on one lever. And that lever was, we're going to drive down costs in the network. We're going to be more efficient. And in some ways, they were completely justified in doing that because service providers have built-in efficiencies because they're bundling multiple products. They already own the broadband customer. This is an add-on for them. And because they can bundle, their total cost of sales is lower. And that's been kind of their lever for driving down costs, driving up EBITDA. But it's also come at the expense, I think, of not thinking strategically around growing revenue as the biggest lever to drive EBITDA. Said differently, service providers have done a really good job of thinking about EBITDA margin contribution, but I think a bad job thinking about EBITDA dollar contribution, gross dollar contribution, which comes from growing top-line sales. So at this point in time, I think one of the biggest challenges, service providers need to ensure that their underlying platform architectures are capable of driving revenue through growth and product innovation. They need to be turning to the cloud themselves, right? Not just selling cloud-based solutions to their end users. So that's number one. Secondly, service providers have to eliminate complexity in their back office. Because service providers in many instances do not own that what we'll call full stack experience running across from their CRM to their quoting and their porting portals and provisioning systems. They're running many different complex operating environments. And in many instances, what we hear from sales teams and service providers is the biggest friction that exists inside their systems is back office, not front office. And so I think, this is where we advise customers, they have to innovate on both fronts. They have to make it easier for their sales teams to sell, easier for their onboarding teams to onboard new customers, easier for their support teams to support those customers. And I think, once again, that plays right into Alianza's strategy, because we're all about single pane of glass, all of your communications products for your end users, available to your CSRs, available to your sales teams, in one easy-to-use portal that's backed by a single API that you can integrate into your back office systems to really automate what I'll call all the back office, high touch, high transaction type work that takes place. So on those two vectors, I think service providers can really stand to improve significantly.
Fantastic. Okay, so in terms of Alianza, there's lots going on in the service provider front, which is great to hear. How are you going to be supporting your service providers this year so they can grow, and what kind of innovations are you expecting to help drive this year as well?
Yeah, I would say, building on my comment about simplification as a driver for success, if you look at Alianza, almost 50% of our engineering resources now are dedicated to the service provider experience, and the other half are dedicated to the end user experience. So on the service provider side, continue to driving a lot of value through automation, integration, what we call full flow through provisioning, end to end, bringing on a new customer. Automate that entire process from provisioning devices, provisioning emergency services, provisioning a phone number, porting a phone number, enabling the right features and functionality in an automated fashion to really remove the manual touch is a big part of our focus for the year. And then I would say on the end user side, we continue to innovate significantly around the business experience, the UCC experience. We did 2 acquisitions last year. Consolidating those has been a major part of kind of our 2021 initiatives. But now with kind of the Counterpath mobility clients fully integrated under the Alianza umbrella, we're now putting a lot of engineering resource behind making those products and those mobile experiences even better for the end user. So those are 2 things. And then, of course, I talked about kind of the telco solution that we're going to be talking more about this year that we're also really excited about. So those are 3 areas that are top of mind for me, that how we're really going to drive value for our customers.
Fantastic. Well, Brian, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for, but thank you for joining me and sharing your insights.
David, thanks again for having me. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
And thank you for watching. You've been watching me, David Dungay, at UC Partner Summit 2022. Don't forget, you can follow all the action on social media by using the Powering Partners hashtag. Don't forget, you can have a look around the show as well. There's lots to see in the UC Partner Summit, lots of stands to visit and lots of content to view. That's it from me. My name's David Dungay. I'll see you next time.